Well, let's talk about form, the three-dimensional aspect. Form is the term we use to describe the three-dimensional aspect of something. Here's our football again, this time seen from a different vantage point and under a lighting that reveals a range of highlights and shadows to convey depth. Without another object in the scene to measure it by, we don't know what its actual size might be, but we get a strong sense of its three-dimensionality or form from this picture. It might be a mini football for all we can tell, because there are no scale references in the picture, such as a ruler or a coin or some other familiar object. At the same time, if we've ever held a football or have seen one on TV, we have some sense of its size. It's the lighting and shadowing and the object's relationship to the surface it rests on, what we call a figure-ground relationship, that gives us visual cues as to its three-dimensional aspects in this picture. We can also count on the knowledge that our viewers will have of the things that we photograph to give them a sense of the three-dimensionality in addition to any visual clues that we create in our pictures. Looking at the relationship between light and shadow is one of the primary ways we emphasize volume, which is another term for form or three-dimensionality. By contrasting shape with form in the same picture, the two-dimensional versus the three-dimensional, you can make a strong statement about each aspect. See how the three-dimensionality of the blowing lace curtain and the two-dimensionality of the flat white wall contrast with one another, and how the shadow of the curtain reveals depth. The emergence of that curtain from the window creates a figure-ground relationship that now is a vertical wall instead of a horizontal table, with the same effect of creating a strong sense of three-dimensionality that pops out of the center in the scene. Shadows that come from an unexpected direction call attention to themselves and to the things that are creating the shadows, and also to the surfaces the shadows are cast upon. Why is it that we do not light our homes primarily with lamps placed at floor level? Of course, because the single most important source of light in our lives, the sun, is above us, and light from that direction is what seems normal. When light comes from any other angle, the three-dimensional effects it creates are more noticeable. They're more pronounced, they're more intriguing to viewers, sometimes scary, so look for those opportunities. When shadows from one object fall upon another object, the highlight and shadow information also gives clues as to the relative distances they are from one another, and of course also their relative three-dimensionality. The sharper the shadows, the more they create an illusion of 3D in the objects that cause them, and also those things that they're cast upon. We can also convey the impression of three-dimensionality in photography by taking advantage of the visual signals sent to viewers by distortions that are common to the process of photography. In this picture, the image of the dog's nose is distorted. It looms out at us, appearing to be quite large compared to the scale of the rest of the dog. Why is that? Well, a very, very short lens, a very wide-angle lens, was used, and it was very, very close to the dog's nose. The distortion and the heightened sense of three-dimensionality results partially, but not primarily, from the focal length of the lens. It mainly results from the difference in distance proportion that is created because of the very close vantage point. Occlusion, O-C-C-L-U-S-I-O-N, is what my grandfather would call a $10 word, which refers to the overlapping of objects. When one object blocks part of another, it creates the appearance of space between the two things. We perceive that the objects that are blocked are in the distance, and the object that is doing the blocking is in the foreground or closer to us. Your viewer's mind will also perceive that larger objects will appear closer in the scene, while smaller objects appear farther in the distance. You can increase this effect whenever near and far objects are of the same type. The location of objects in the picture plane is also a visual cue that most viewers look to for an indication of foreground and background space. The closer the objects are to the top of the frame, the farther away most viewers will see them as being. The closer they are to the bottom of the frame, the closer most viewers will see them as being positioned in space. You have learned how to control depth of field in your photographs, and you know that you have choices as to whether to adjust your settings to create pictures in which just about everything is in focus, or so that only small areas will be in focus. It is in that second kind of picture where depth of field is very shallow, in other words, we have a very shallow focus area, that we imply distance by comparison of things that are in and out of focus. When I photographed this New York City commuter on a subway, seen through the bodies of others who were standing in between us, I knew that her distant gaze would be matched by the apparent distance of her position in the photograph. Finally, while we have talked about how shadows convey 3D signals, we should also talk about highlights, the areas of an object that have more direct reflections of a light source than other areas. The gradation of the light from highlight area to darker areas is a very important indicator of a three-dimensional effect that we want to be aware of as photographers, or artists in any medium for that matter. The highlight at the top of the woman's bag and the brighter area on the top of her pants make both of those areas more 3D in appearance. Let's move on to the next visual element, texture.